So in this discussion, we're going to look at the two nurses' songs as good examples of poems that you could use in a lot of situations. The nurses' songs, one in innocence, one in experience, both give you the chance to talk about power, about control, to some extent about human organisation. And they're interesting in terms of their structure of happening and the language that they employ. We have here authority figures is a central focus of the two poems, and challenging authority is part of that as well, by implication at least. There's ideas of manipulation, suggestions of punishment and suppression. Certainly it's about freedom. It could be linked to the positions of women, although that's not something that's particularly focused on. In terms of those things there, these two poems do have strong political implications, even though they seem to be about something very much at a domestic level, but the syllabus is clear that the domestic is political because it involves power. And for our question themes that have come up so far, we can see that there's issues of constraint and oppression and control. Religion isn't particularly focused on, but could be kind of, by implication, one of the other figures of authority that the poem is challenging. The power to resist is again implied by the very fact that the two poems make the points they do. The marginalised is something that's perhaps less obvious, but might again be implied in that it's about the powerful and the weak. And that could be a metaphor or symbol for relations other than just the nurse and the children. Personal relations in one poem are liberating and in another poem are not. And certainly authority figures is a big focus in these two poems. The innocent joy of the first poem is contrasted strongly with the experience poem, where joy seems to be sort of crushed and suppressed. If we start actually with the innocence poem, it's longer than the experience one. We've got 4 stanzas here. Deceptively simple in structure. The rhyme scheme is the simplest rhyme scheme of really just the second and fourth line rhyming, and no particular effort to rhyme elsewhere in the other parts of the poem. We have here an image of children playing, and that is an image in itself of freedom and joy and the innocent joy of childhood. And it again refers to, as we often have, to Rousseau's idea that human beings are naturally good and innocent, and that children represent that, and that the best way therefore to bring up children is to allow that natural innocence and goodness to flourish and not to suppress it. So to avoid overly controlling children, letting their wishes and their moods and emotions guide you a lot more than perhaps the parental figure might instinctively think is right. The temptation always as the parent figure is to impose your will on the children, thinking you know best. This poem suggests that that might not be the case. We have the image of the green. There's other poems where he refers to that. It's an image of freedom, nature being used by people, but freely in a communal way. The implication being that in some situations those free spaces had been enclosed and controlled and closed down. The sort of green lawn in the middle of the village where everybody could play or relax or feel there was a space for them. And that seems to be the case here. There's a sense of harmony, the idea that the nurse, of course we've got to remember nurses here means something much closer to what we would say nanny or childminder rather than any sort of medical nurse. And we've got the sense here that she's very much in harmony with the children because they're happy. She's happy. She speaks, and there's always voices in Blake's poems that would be interesting to look at. And she speaks about wishing to bring them home. And that's fear of nighttime often representing in the poems as sort of enclosing and darkening and troubling times, things to be aware of. the invisible worm flies in the night in the sick rose. Night is one of the last poems in the Innocence volume. And then at the start of the experience, we have these 2 poems about wishing to sort of dispel the night and bring back day. So day and night are simple symbols for darkness, confusion, fear on one hand, and freedom, openness, knowledge, understanding on the other. Here the children know their voice is heard. They were heard in the first line of the poem, and then we actually hear them speak in the second part of the poem. And they respond to the nurse by saying, no, we want to continue to play. And they're linked with birds that fly, and sheep on the hills, which relates to the schoolboy and the lamb, 2 poems that link children with creatures. And the nurse's response is casual, well, just very easygoing, and sends them off. And says, yes, okay, you've decided you want to play, then go and play. And the poem ends with leaps, shouts, laughs, and echoes. So all the things there that suggest happiness, freedom, joy, unrestrained exuberance, what childhood really should be, and then echoed again that sense of harmony. So as we've suggested here, this is a poem in which there is an escape from constraints, because there really are no constraints. The constraints are loosened, that those figures of authority, like a nurse, like a parent, like any figure of authority, so also like somebody in the church, somebody in government, they can all let go those reins and let go those restraints. And so the poem might be about a domestic setting of a childminder allowing their children to play out late at night, but it could be by implication about all authority being much more liberal and allowing people to make their own decisions for themselves. So here, the parental figure, the nurse, she's not a parent, but she stands in lieu of the parent, is not oppressive or controlling. She is very open to the child's point of view and allows the child to do as they wish. The human spirit resists very simply and very quickly here. No, we're not going to go home, and to get what they want. If you protest, if you resist, seems to be the implication, you might get what you want. People might actually listen to you. It's very optimistic, you might say rather naive view, if that's what the poem is suggesting, that by simply saying to the government, for instance, no, I don't wish to follow your laws or rules or impositions, that they will go, oh, yes, you're right, go ahead, you do what you want. It seems very naive that would ever happen. However, if you don't say what you want, you certainly won't get it, will you? There aren't marginalised figures in this poem as such, but by implication, the children could represent all those who are disadvantaged and thereby could be marginalised potentially by a figure of authority like the nurse representing the government, for instance. But they're not marginalised here. Their views are placed centrally and allowed to prevail. So personal relationships here, well, the nurse with the children is a parental type figure, and there's a lot of parental relationships you could have dealt with in that question, which was otherwise quite a challenging one if you didn't see it through that light. Personal relationships do seem to be liberating here because the nurse allows them to be liberating. She rescinds her authority. And so here the authority figures do have compassion and are kind. And innocence does lead to joy and happiness, it seems. But again, there's only that slight doubt that maybe this is just a rather naive view that the protest really is that the world isn't like this, that most authority figures are not willing to give up their power. And this is what we see when we look at the experience version of the poem, much shorter, much more constrained, and that's straight away an idea, isn't it, that in the world of experience, where we think that should mean that things are more open and free, therefore, we experience more, we expect that as we gain experience in this life, we might, broaden our horizons, but not here. Here what happens is that things get closed in, and that's not to anyone's advantage, really. Even the nurse herself is deeply unhappy. So what we see here is the first line is pretty much the same. The voices are heard on the green, but they become whisperings in the second line. So, straight away, you've got that very opposite feel here. There's no kind of sense of happiness and joy and laughter, but sort of something sinister and secretive. And the dark secret love of the sick rose is really what this poem again is hinting at there in that second line. And the nurse's reaction now is not in sympathy with the children, it's in opposition to them. So she grows green, pale as with envy, it seems, is the suggestion there. By thinking about her own youth, rather than saying, oh yes, I remember when I was a child and this is how I would have liked, she's just jealous of their relative youth and perhaps sickened and cross about her age. And that is one reason perhaps why people of middle and old age become more conservative. Is one simple psychological explanation is they're jealous of those who are younger. They miss their youth. They don't like being old, and they take that sort of sense of disappointment and bitterness out on those who are in their power. So the Dews of night, there's often references to dews, D-E-W-S, and the dews always represent something sinister and dark and dangerous. And there was this suggestion at Blake's time, in those sort of, when medical science was still in its infancy, that there's something bad about damp air, that damp air contains something that will cause disease. And there's obviously some connection there. It's bad for you to be exposed to dampness in general, and it's linked to things like mold, etc., that we know from our news stories at the moment. We hear quite a lot of stories about people living in terrible housing conditions where there are mold growing on the walls. But it was a kind of very vague idea in Blake's time that the dews of night were somehow full with these dangerous diseases, and that's how you would potentially end up catching something fatal. But then that kind of, the final two lines are particularly dismissive. You're wasting your time by playing, so there's no joy there. And that it's a very puritanical view, and that Blake generally, without ever really mentioning it as such, opposes the puritanical view, the view that all pleasure is wrong and that we should sort of dedicate ourselves to a disciplined life of spiritual reflection, preparing for the afterlife by minimizing our impact in this world and our connection with this world, really, that the world itself is sort of all full of temptation and sin, and that what we should do is do as little as possible, really. And certainly the pleasures of the flesh, the sort of food, drink, sex, and all the other things that we might enjoy are temptations that take us away from what matters. And therefore play, even for a child, is a waste of time. And then your winter and night in disguise, the suggestion again linking with the whisperings that secrecy, hiding things, the dark secret love of the sick rose again here, that life of the experience phase of your life is not a happy time. It's not a free time and not an honest time, disguised, suggesting dishonesty. You have to hide your true feelings. And again, we've seen Blake throughout saying that you should express your feelings. You should say how you feel. He talks in one of his prophetic books about never nursing an unacted upon desire, that you must actually speak what you feel. And of course in the Poison Tree he talks about, I let my friend know my wrath and that wrath was ended, but if I held the wrath in, then it became more poisonous as time went on. So the whole of this pair of poems together represent Blake's view that freedom is what we crave, freedom is what we deserve, freedom is what we should give to others. When we have any authority over them, we should use that merely to allow them to be free. But that we are constantly threatened by these lords or ladies of limit, these leaders who will try to control us because they think somehow it's in our best interest. They might use that as the argument, oh, I'm protecting you. But what they're really doing is preventing us from living our lives to the full. And so, again, this is an image of constraint and oppression and control. And although it doesn't mention religion directly, you could link this to religious figures and religious beliefs quite strongly, to puritanical beliefs about what's good and bad, and to those church figures, the priests and bishops and etc., who try to tell the people how to behave. Here, the human spirit has very little power to resist. There's no sense that the children get a voice. They are heard in the first line, and then their voice diminishes to a whisper and then disappears, and we just hear the cruel statements of the nurse herself. So if the children represent marginalised people or deprived people or disadvantaged people or weak people, then here they're kind of crushed and silenced. And again, here from London is the word we've got to remember. That constantly Blake's saying, let's listen to the voices of those who are less fortunate or those who are low in the hierarchy. And here they are not listened to. The whisperings is the only suggestion of possible resistance there, that there could be this kind of rebellion, this plotting beneath the surface of things, where people band together to kind of talk secretly about how they will somehow overcome the authority. So unkind and lacking compassion, certainly the authority figures here. If innocence leads to joy and happiness, well, there is no innocence here. Innocence is denied. The children denied their childhood, and that links to poems like this, the Chimney Sweepers, where the children were denied their childhood by being sent out to work before they were really anywhere close to being adults. And again, that's one of the things that Blake is always protesting about children being denied the opportunity to play. And here he says that very directly. So it's another one of the many poems in which Blake makes clear that he stands up for freedom and he's troubled by authority.